Just one touch, the billionaire murmured, and she melted into his embrace. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain drizzled against the tall glass windows of the downtown restaurant, painting soft ripples over the city lights. Olivia Hart sat alone at a corner table, fingers wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee. Her eyes were fixed on the raindrops racing down the glass, each one blurring her reflection a little more. She looked exhausted but determined. Just 3 hours ago, her landlord had given her an ultimatum: pay the late rent by Friday or pack up her things. Across the city, inside a towering skyscraper wrapped in silver steel and power, Alexander Grant was ending another relentless day. 34 years old, billionaire CEO of Grant Holdings, a man whose signature could move markets, but lately, even his empire felt hollow. His board was pressuring him to settle down, to marry, to humanize his image before the next merger. He hated the word humanize. Fate, or something that looked a lot like desperation, brought them together. Olivia worked as a paralegal in one of the law firms that handled Grant Holdings' minor contracts. She had seen him only once before walking through the lobby, phone in hand, flanked by assistants like a small army. He had not noticed her then. He was about to notice her now. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. She was called upstairs to deliver some urgent documents. When she stepped into his private office, she froze. The room felt like another world-polished mahogany, a skyline view, the quiet hum of success. Alexander looked up from his desk, eyes the color of storm clouds. "Miss Hart?" His voice was calm but sharp, the kind that made you straighten your back. "Yes, sir," she replied, setting the folder on his desk. "These are the revised terms for the Atlantic project." He nodded, flipping through the pages, but his gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. "You are efficient," he said simply. "Do you like working here?" Olivia hesitated. "It pays the bills, sir." That answer, honest, unpolished, stirred something in him. A small smirk appeared. "I respect that." He closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Tell me, Miss Hart, what would you do if you needed $50,000 by Friday?" Her breath caught. "That is an oddly specific question." "Hypothetically," he said, "what would you do?" She looked away, embarrassed. "I would probably cry first. Then I would work until I collapsed." He stood, walking toward the window. "There might be another way." He turned, meeting her confused gaze. "Marry me." Olivia blinked, certain she had misheard. "I am sorry, what?" "You heard me," he said evenly. "Marry me. It will be a contract. 6 months. No strings attached. You will be compensated more than fairly." The silence between them stretched thin. The rain outside seemed to pause, holding its breath. "Why me?" she finally whispered. "Because you are ordinary," he said, and somehow it did not sound cruel. "Because you do not want my money, and because I need someone who will not complicate this arrangement with feelings." Her heart pounded. It was insane. It was reckless. But the eviction notice in her purse burned like fire. "And what happens," she asked softly, "if someone falls in love?" Alexander's lips curved slightly, but his eyes stayed cold. "That is the first rule of the contract, Miss Hart. We do not fall in love." Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Inside, 2 signatures were about to change everything. Rain had not stopped all night. By morning, the city looked washed out, gray streets glistening beneath a pale sky. Olivia barely slept. The words, "Marry me," echoed through her mind like a bell that would not stop ringing. Every part of her wanted to believe she had imagined it, but she had the contract now signed, sealed, and waiting for the first step. That morning, she stood outside Alexander Grant's office again, holding a small suitcase. She had packed only what she needed: a few changes of clothes, her mother's old silver bracelet, and her courage. When the receptionist opened the door, Olivia's heart thudded against her ribs. Alexander was already there, leaning by the window in a dark suit, his tie perfectly straight. He turned when she entered. "Right on time," he said. "I did not want to start my fake marriage by being late," she replied softly. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Good answer," He gestured toward a folder on his desk. This contains the official terms, 6 months, public appearances, and confidentiality. You will move into my residence today. Our first event together will be Friday evening at the Hamilton Gala. Questions? Olivia tried to steady her voice. What happens when someone asks how we met? We will say it was a charity dinner, he replied smoothly. Keep it simple, keep it believable. She nodded. Every part of this felt surreal. Yet, under his cool tone, she sensed something restrained, an exhaustion, perhaps even loneliness. When she left his office, a car was already waiting at the curb. The driver greeted her by name and carried her small suitcase into the sleek black sedan. As they drove through the city, the skyscrapers gave way to quiet streets lined with old oak trees. Soon, the car pulled through tall iron gates and into the driveway of a mansion that looked more like a private museum. The Grant estate was enormous marble pillars, fountains, and wide stone steps that seemed to rise forever. Inside, every surface gleamed. Chandeliers cast golden light across polished floors. Staff members nodded politely as she passed, their expressions neutral. Mrs. Grant, one of them said, and the title hit her chest like a jolt. She forced a smile. Please call me Olivia. Her room overlooked the garden, the kind of room she had only seen in magazines. The closet was already stocked with dresses in her size. Someone had done their research. On the vanity sat a note in Alexander's handwriting. Dinner at 7. Do not be nervous. Just be yourself. She laughed softly to herself. Be herself? How could she, when her life was suddenly a page torn from someone else's story? At dinner, Alexander was composed as always. He spoke little, mostly about logistics events, appearances, timing. Yet between the pauses, he watched her. When she struggled to use the right fork, he quietly switched his to match hers. When she reached for water, he filled her glass first. Why me, really? She asked suddenly. There must have been 100 women who would have agreed without hesitation. He set down his fork. Because you were not one of them. The words hung between them, gentle yet heavy. She looked at him then, not the billionaire, but the man beneath the sharp suit and perfect posture. For the first time, she saw something fragile behind his calm. Later that night, Olivia stood alone on the balcony, watching the rain start again. The city lights flickered in the distance. Somewhere inside the mansion, she could hear Alexander on a phone call, his tone clipped and cold, as if sealing another deal. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "This is not real." But her heartbeat said otherwise. The next few days moved like scenes in a dream Olivia could not quite control. A team arrived at the mansion early each morning, stylists, etiquette coaches, and a public relations consultant who spoke faster than she could breathe. Every day brought another lesson in posture, speech, and how to move through rooms filled with people who lived on magazine covers. By Thursday, she could glide down a staircase without tripping on her gown and smile through a conversation without revealing her nerves. Still, when she looked at her reflection, she saw a stranger staring back a woman wrapped in silk and confidence that did not belong to her. Alexander watched her progress quietly. He attended a few sessions but rarely interfered. When she made a small mistake, like addressing a guest too casually or holding a glass wrong, he would simply murmur, "Again," in that calm, commanding tone. There was no mockery in his voice, only expectation, and somehow she wanted to meet it. Friday evening arrived sooner than she expected. The Hamilton Gala was one of the city's most anticipated charity events, where every powerful name and fortune gathered under chandeliers and cameras. For Olivia, it felt like stepping into another planet. The limousine door opened, and flashes burst instantly. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones reached for their faces. Alexander stepped out first, tall and composed, then turned to her and offered his hand. "Remember," he said quietly, "you belong here." She took his hand. The touch steadied her more than she cared to admit. Together, they walked the red carpet, smiling for photographers, pausing for short interviews. Alexander's arm remained lightly at her waist, guiding her through the crowd with effortless grace. Inside the ballroom, everything shimmered gold accents, crystal glasses, the murmur of money and influence. Olivia could feel every eye turned toward them. The billionaire who had finally brought a woman to a public event was news by itself. Halfway through the evening, a woman approached, elegant and familiar with Alexander's world. "Alexander," she purred, "you have been hiding this lovely wife from us." Olivia smiled. careful and polite. "It is a pleasure to meet you." The woman's eyes glinted. "You are full of surprises, Alexander. I was beginning to think you preferred mergers over marriages." He responded smoothly. "Some partnerships are worth the investment." His gaze flicked toward Olivia, and for a heartbeat, it felt real. Later, during a short break in the music, a waiter stumbled, spilling champagne across the tablecloth. Several guests gasped. Without hesitation, Olivia stood and helped steady the tray before the glasses fell. "It is all right," she said warmly. "No harm done." She smiled at the flustered waiter until he relaxed. A murmur rippled through the nearby table's surprise, then approval. The billionaire's new wife was kind. Alexander's expression softened as he watched her. When the night ended, the car ride home was quiet. Olivia leaned back against the seat, exhausted but strangely calm. "Did I pass the test?" she asked. Alexander looked at her for a long moment. "There was never a test," he said, "but if there had been, you passed." As the city lights slid across his face, he seemed less like a man built from steel and more like someone searching for air. When they reached the mansion, he helped her out of the car. Their hands brushed just a moment, barely a touch, but enough to send a spark through both of them. Inside, he turned to her. "You did well tonight, Olivia." She met his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Grant." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Alexander, when it is just us, call me Alexander." She nodded, her heart suddenly unsteady. The rules were still written, but for the first time, they no longer felt unbreakable. The following week unfolded like a strange rhythm Olivia had never known before. Days were filled with fittings, photographs, and business dinners that were supposed to look like dates. Each night she would return to the mansion and change from the woman the world saw into herself again. Barefoot, hair undone, standing by the window with a cup of tea she rarely finished. Alexander kept his distance at first. He was polite, professional, almost too careful. Yet little by little, cracks appeared in his perfectly controlled routine. Some nights she would find him in the library, still in his suit, reading files long after midnight. Other times he would join her at breakfast, unshaven and quiet, his usual armor of composure gone. One evening, heavy rain began to fall again. The house felt too large, the silence too deep. Olivia walked into the study to return a book and found him sitting by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, eyes fixed on the flames. He looked up as she entered. "Could not sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too quiet." "Silence can be louder than noise," he said softly. "It makes you hear things you try to forget." She hesitated, then sat across from him. "What do you try to forget?" He studied the glass before answering. "Losing my father, building everything from nothing, realizing success can fill your bank account but empty your soul." The honesty in his voice surprised her. He was not the cold businessman from the newspapers. He was human, flawed, grieving, and tired. She said quietly, "Then why keep running?" He looked at her, eyes unreadable. "Because stopping feels like falling." They sat in silence for a long while, the fire crackling between them. When she stood to leave, he reached out, almost without thinking, and brushed her wrist with his fingertips. It was the lightest touch, but it made her heart stumble. The next morning, the tabloids exploded with headlines, "Alexander Grant's mysterious wife charms the city." Photos from the gala covered every page. In each picture, they looked like a perfect couple. In truth, the distance between them felt more fragile than ever. At lunch, his assistant entered the dining room with a folder. "Mr. Grant, the board wants confirmation that your marriage is stable before next month's negotiations." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Of course it is," he said. "Tell them they will see for themselves at the foundation dinner next week." Ugh. After the assistant left, Olivia sighed. "So we are on display again?" He met her gaze. "That is what this was always about." "Right," she said quietly. "A contract." He noticed the hurt she tried to hide. "Olivia," he said, softer now, "I know this is not easy, but you have handled everything with more grace than anyone I have ever met." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then tell me something real, Alexander. Just once. Not as a businessman, not as a headline." He exhaled slowly. "Something real?" His voice dropped. "You make this house feel alive." Her chest tightened. Before she could reply, his phone rang. The moment broke. He answered sharply, his tone shifting back to business. She rose quietly and left the room, her heart pounding with words she could not say. That night, As she walked past his office, she heard him speaking on the phone again. His voice was low, tired. Yes, the arrangement is working. She is perfect for the part. Olivia froze. The words cut deep, echoing down the marble hallway. Perfect for the part. That was all she was a role to play. She turned away, her vision blurring with the same rain that beat softly against the windows. In the distance, the thunder rolled once more, just like the night they met. The next morning, Olivia woke with the sound of rain still whispering against the windows. The mansion felt colder than usual, as if the words she had overheard had settled in its walls, perfect for the part. They echoed in her mind again and again. Downstairs, breakfast was already served. The table was laid out beautifully, but Alexander was not there. His assistant informed her that he had left early for a meeting. She nodded, keeping her expression neutral, but the emptiness in her chest only grew. She spent the rest of the morning wandering through the house. Every room looked too perfect, too arranged. It was all performance, the same illusion she had been living in for weeks. When she reached the library, she stopped. On the desk sat the contract they had signed. The neat lines of type looked colder now, more final. By evening, the mansion came alive again. Staff moved quickly, setting up for the foundation dinner scheduled that night. Olivia put on the dress Alexander had chosen for her, a deep blue gown that shimmered under the lights. It was beautiful, but it felt like armor. When she entered the main hall, Alexander was already there in a black tuxedo, speaking with board members and investors. He looked every bit the billionaire composed, confident, untouchable. When his eyes met hers, he paused for half a second, then gave her a faint, polite smile. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly when she reached him. "I have been ready since the day we signed that contract," she said, her tone calm but distant. The dinner began smoothly. Cameras flashed, guests laughed, and the couple at the center of attention played their roles perfectly. But as the speeches continued, Olivia could feel the tension building inside her. The words he had said on the phone would not leave her. During the toast, a reporter stood and asked loudly, "Mr. Grant, rumor has it that your marriage was arranged for business reasons. Care to comment?" The entire room fell silent. Olivia froze. Alexander's expression did not change. "Rumors are the price of success," he said evenly. "But as you can see, my wife and I are very real." Then he turned toward her, his hand reaching for hers. It was part of the act, but she could not do it anymore. Olivia took a deep breath and said softly yet firmly, "You are right. Rumors are part of success. And sometimes, so are lies." Her voice, carried through the microphone she had forgotten, was still pinned to her gown. A ripple of shock moved through the room. Alexander's eyes widened. "Olivia," she continued, her hands trembling, "this marriage started as a deal, a transaction. But for me, it became more than that. I cared. I tried to believe that somewhere inside all this there was something real." She looked straight at him. "I was wrong." She turned and walked out of the ballroom before anyone could stop her. The photographers shouted. Flashes went off, but she kept moving until the noise faded behind her. Outside, the rain poured harder, soaking her dress as she reached the gate. She did not look back. The car that had once symbolized safety now felt like a cage she refused to enter again. Back inside the ballroom, Alexander stood motionless. The applause and chatter that had filled the room moments earlier had turned into whispers. For the first time in years, he felt something close to fear. Not of failure, but of losing someone who had made him remember what being alive truly meant. He handed his glass to a stunned waiter and walked out into the storm. The flashes of lightning lit up the sky as he searched for her. But by the time he reached the gate, she was gone. Only the sound of rain remained, falling against the stone steps where she had once stood beside him, pretending to be his wife until, without realizing it, she had become his truth. For 3 days, Olivia disappeared from the world she had been forced to live in. No reporters found her. No headlines mentioned her name. The mansion that once echoed with her footsteps now felt like a silent monument to everything Alexander had lost but never truly owned. She returned to her old apartment, a small, one-bedroom place with peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of coffee from the cafe downstairs. It was not luxury, but it was real. She spent the first day in bed, listening to the rain outside and trying to quiet the storm inside her chest. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw his face cold in the ballroom, unreadable, standing among strangers who called her perfect. On the third morning, her phone rang. It was a number she did not recognize. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Miss Hart," a calm voice said. "This is Dr. Miller from Grant Foundation. Mr. Grant requested a meeting about the scholarship program you proposed last month. He said it was important." She hesitated. That program had been her idea, something she had mentioned once in passing. It was supposed to help low-income students finish their education, an echo of her own story. "When?" she asked. "Today, at noon," the doctor replied. 2 hours later, Olivia stood in front of the glass building that bore his name. She told herself it was just business. She would discuss the program, sign whatever was needed, and walk away for good. Inside the boardroom, Alexander was already waiting. He looked different, tired, unshaven, no tie, no mask of perfection. When their eyes met, he stood immediately. "Olivia," he said softly, "thank you for coming." "I came for the students, not for you," she answered. He nodded. "Then we are here for the same reason." He opened a folder on the table. Inside was a complete proposal funding, logistics, her name printed at the top as co-director. "You finished it," she said quietly. "You started it," he replied. "I just made sure it would happen." Silence filled the room. The hum of the city below seemed distant. Alexander's voice softened. "I know I hurt you. I know what you heard. But that phone call, it was not what you think. I was speaking to an investor who wanted reassurance. I said what they needed to hear to protect you." Olivia looked at him, her walls trembling but not yet fallen. "Protect me? You made me feel like a performance." "I know," he admitted, "because that is what I made everything in my life a performance. Until you. You were the only part that ever felt real." Her throat tightened. "Then why did you wait until now?" "Because I did not know how to tell the truth until I lost you," he said. The boardroom was quiet except for the soft ticking of a clock. He stepped closer but kept his distance, his voice steady. "There is no contract now, no arrangement, but there is one thing I want you to know. The foundation, the program, all of it, your idea, your name, your legacy, it is yours if you want it." She looked down at the papers, then back at him. "And what do you want, Alexander?" His answer was almost a whisper. A second chance. Not to rewrite the contract, but to start without one. Her heart ached, torn between anger and something deeper she could not silence. She took the folder and said quietly, "I will think about it." Then she walked toward the door. He did not stop her this time. But as she left, he said one last thing, his voice breaking just enough to sound human. "You once told me that love should feel like honesty. I am finally trying to learn what that means." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Olivia stood on the sidewalk, folder pressed to her chest, uncertain of what would happen next. But for the first time, she knew one thing for sure: the story was not over yet. The next week brought an uneasy calm. Olivia returned to work at her small law firm, determined to focus on the foundation project rather than the man behind it. She buried herself in paperwork, drafting contracts, and answering endless emails from the new Grant Scholarship Board. Every line she wrote reminded her of him, yet she forced herself to stay detached. But distance could not silence the city. The tabloids had already shifted the story: Alexander Grant's mysterious wife leaves charity gala in tears. Another headline read, "Marriage in crisis. Sources claim it was all for show." Every headline was a mirror she refused to look into. One evening, after a long day, she stopped by the Grant Foundation to drop off the final approval documents. The building was mostly empty. The front desk lights were dim, and the sound of her heels echoed through the marble corridor. She did not expect to see him there. Yet when the elevator doors opened, he was standing in the lobby, his sleeves rolled up, reviewing files under the faint glow of the desk lamp. His eyes lifted the moment he sensed her presence. "Working late again?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "So are you." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt heavier than before. No contract, no arrangement. Just two people unsure of how to start over. She set the folder on the counter. "These are the final approvals for the scholarship program. Everything is ready to launch next month." He nodded. "I read your revisions. You made it stronger." Silence settled again. Olivia turned to leave, but he said quietly, "Olivia, wait." His tone carried a weight she could not ignore. He walked closer, his expression unguarded. I have spent my entire life building walls around my company, my reputation, myself. When you walked away, those walls finally cracked. You did not break me. You freed me." She looked down, her heart tightening. "I am not here to fix you, Alexander. I just wanted to make something good come out of what we had." "I know," he said, "but you did more than that. You made me remember who I wanted to be before everything became numbers and deals." She felt the tears rising but held them back. "Then do something real with it," she said quietly. "Use your power to make change, not to make noise." "I am trying," he answered, "but I do not want to do it alone." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a formal invitation, Grant Foundation Annual Charity Ball. At the bottom, in his handwriting, were the words, "One last promise. Come if you believe there is still something worth saving." Olivia stared at it for a long moment. "You really do not give up easily, do you?" He smiled faintly. "I built an empire out of stubbornness. I can try to rebuild us with the same." She tucked the invitation into her bag. "I will think about it," she said, echoing her words from before. As she turned to leave, Alexander said quietly, "If you come, I will not make another speech about business. I will only tell the truth." Outside, the city lights glimmered across the wet pavement. She walked slowly, the invitation heavy in her hand. She did not know whether she would go, but for the first time since walking out of that ballroom, the ache in her chest was mixed with something else, hope, fragile but alive. Back inside the building, Alexander stood by the window, watching her silhouette fade into the night. For a man who once measured everything in profit and loss, he finally understood what it meant to risk something that could not be bought back. The storm that had defined them had passed, but the question still lingered in the air: was love enough to rebuild what pride had broken? The night of the Grant Foundation Charity Ball arrived sooner than Olivia expected. The event was all over the news. Reporters called it the rebirth of the empire, a celebration of the company's new humanitarian branch. To the public, it was another glamorous evening. To Alexander Grant, it was his final chance to make things right. Olivia stood in front of her mirror, holding the invitation in one hand and the blue gown in the other, the same dress she had worn the night everything fell apart. She hesitated before slipping it on. The reflection staring back was not the same woman who had once walked beside him under camera flashes. This woman had lived through heartbreak, truth, and quiet strength. When she arrived at the grand ballroom, the music had already started. Guests mingled under crystal chandeliers. The flash of cameras followed every move Alexander made as he greeted donors and government officials, but when he turned and saw her entering, everything else faded. He excused himself and crossed the room. "You came," he said, breath unsteady for the first time she could remember. "I am here for the foundation," she replied softly. His eyes searched hers. "Then let me at least thank you for the foundation, and for coming tonight." They stood in silence for a moment before the master of ceremonies called Alexander to the stage. He straightened his jacket, but his gaze never left her. As he walked up the steps, Olivia felt her pulse quicken. The hall fell quiet. He began speaking, but not in his usual calculated tone. His voice was clear, steady, and raw. "For years, I believed that control was power, that keeping people at a distance was the way to survive. But someone walked into my life and reminded me that true strength does not come from control, it comes from honesty." The crowd watched in surprise as he continued. "The woman who helped build this foundation taught me that compassion is not weakness, it is courage. And tonight, I want to make something clear. Olivia Hart was never a contract. She was the reason I stopped being one." A wave of murmurs spread through the audience. Cameras flashed, but Alexander did not care. He stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward her. Every eye in the room followed him. Standing before her, he took a deep breath. "You once asked what would happen if someone fell in love. I have the answer now. I did." The words hung in the air, pure and undeniable. For a long moment, Olivia could not move. The music had stopped, but her heartbeat filled the silence. "Alexander," she whispered, "you should not do this in front of everyone." "I have hidden behind should not for too long," he said. "Tonight, I want to be real." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was not a diamond ring, but a thin silver band, simple, unadorned, honest. No contracts, no conditions, just a promise that whatever happens next, it will be real. Tears filled her eyes. Around them, the audience had fallen silent, waiting. For the first time since the night of the gala, she did not feel like an actress in someone else's play. She felt seen. She looked at him, voice trembling but clear. "You said you were learning what honesty means. So am I." She placed her hand over his. "If we start again, it cannot be about fixing the past. It has to be about building something true." He nodded. "Then we start from here." The room erupted in applause as he slipped the ring into her palm instead of her finger, a quiet gesture that said everything. It was not a proposal, but a beginning. Later, as the music resumed, they stood together under the chandeliers. For once, the lights did not blind them. They simply glowed. Olivia looked at him and realized that the story that began as a contract had become something neither of them planned, something real, something earned. In that moment, for the first time in his life, Alexander Grant was not performing. He was simply a man, standing beside the woman who had taught him how to love. A month later, spring sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the Grant Foundation headquarters. The grand opening of the scholarship program had drawn a crowd of students, teachers, and journalists. But for Olivia, it was more than a ceremony. It was the moment her idea had become real, independent of the mistakes that created it. She stood at the podium, speaking with calm confidence. "This program is about opportunity," she said, her voice steady. "It is about believing that kindness and effort can change a life, no matter where you start." When she finished, the audience applauded, and for the first time in a long time, she felt entirely herself, no disguise, no title, no contract. At the back of the room, Alexander watched. He had stayed away from the spotlight during her speech, wanting the focus to be on her. When the crowd began to disperse, he approached quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "For the woman who once said she could not afford coffee," he said with a soft smile. She laughed, the sound light and genuine. "You remembered." "I remember everything," he replied. They sat together on the steps outside the building, watching students take photos in front of the new sign, the Olivia Hart Scholarship. The name had been his idea, though he never announced it publicly. He just made sure it was carved into the marble. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The way things used to be, the business, the control, the power?" Alexander took a long sip of coffee before answering. "Sometimes, but then I remember how empty it felt. This," he said, gesturing toward the students laughing nearby, "feels better than any merger ever did." For a while, they sat in comfortable silence. The city buzzed in the distance, but between them, there was peace. "Olivia," he said finally, turning toward her, "I have been thinking about something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was their old contract, creased, worn, and meaningless now. "I kept this," he said, "not because I wanted to remember the deal, but because it reminds me of the day everything started." She looked at the paper, then at him. "You should let it go," she said gently. He smiled and handed it to her. "Then you do it." She unfolded it slowly. At the bottom were their signatures, side by side. Without a word, she tore it in half. The sound was quiet, but final. The pieces fluttered down onto the steps, carried away by the wind. He reached into his pocket once more and held out the same simple silver band he had given her at the charity ball. "No grand stage this time," he said softly. "Just us." Her eyes met his. "You are sure?" He nodded. "For the first time in my life, I am sure of something that has nothing to do with business." She took the ring and slid it onto her finger. The sunlight caught it, casting a soft glow across her hand. Around them, the world moved on cars, voices, laughter, but for that moment, everything felt still. Alexander leaned closer, his voice low. "You once said, love should feel like honesty. This is what it feels like to me." Olivia smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Then maybe we finally got it right." He reached for her hand, and together they stood, facing the building that carried both their names in different ways. The mansion, the contracts, the headlines, all of it belonged to the past. What remained was simple and real. 2 people who had chosen each other without conditions. As they walked down the steps, the torn contract pieces danced in the wind behind them. It was not the end of their story, just the proof that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the mistakes we dare to fix with love.